welcome back to You Heard It From a CFP. My name is Matthew Coyle. I'm Director of Financial Planning here at Advanced Capital Group in Minnesota, otherwise known as ACG. We are an investment manager, financial planning, and wealth management firm here in Minneapolis, and today we are talking about retirement. How do you know when you are ready to retire? And more importantly, what do we look for with the clients that we work with the folks that we advise? How do we know that they are ready for retirement? How do we quantify it? That's what we're talking about today on episode 78. Let's dive in. All right, retirement. You know, it sounds scary. It doesn't have to be. There are certain metrics we look for to determine whether or not you are ready for retirement. You know, on a personal level, one thing I really like working about in this industry is that there are right and wrong answers to these questions. So many things in life kind of delve into a philosophical debate sometimes. You could be right, you could be wrong. But in this case, we can give you very clear answers to whether or not quantitatively we think you're ready for retirement or not. Now, there's a lot of things that go into that decision, but on the quantitative side, we look for four things. Number one, do you have a reasonable draw rate in retirement as far as drawing from your assets? And I'll talk about what that means in just a second. Number two, where's the income going to come from? How are you going to spend it? What order is it going to be spent? Number three, do you have a bridge to healthcare between now and age of 65 if you retire before then, and many people do? And number four, do you have a reasonable rate of return assumption? What are you assuming that your assets are going to generate in retirement? You generate the answers to those four things, or you can come up with data on those four things. You will have a very, very good indication whether or not you are ready to retire from a quantitative standpoint. So let's look at each one of those four real briefly, and we'll start with draw rates. All right, first thing I look for. Number one, draw rates. What is a draw rate? A draw rate is just the amount of money each year you plan to pull out in retirement relative to the total amount you have saved in the beginning of that year. Okay, so whatever your starting balance is in that year minus the draw rate, and then a residual balance at the end of the year, and then it rolls to the next year, right? So we know from decades of research, there's been lots of research done in the financial planning area, that 4 to 6% per year is a very sustainable mathematical draw rate. Now, depending on how much you're assuming on your rate of return, and depending on how much you're spending, that can affect your draw rate. But your draw rate that we look for specifically is somewhere between 4 and 6%. If it's less than 4%, you might not fully enjoy all the assets that you saved, and you might have more to pass on to the next generation, and that's fine too. Anything more than 6, probably not mathematically sustainable, and you'll need some extra income to supplement through a part-time job or some other source of income, or maybe extra draws from an annuity or whatever you may have. But 4 to 6% of your assets is going to be a pretty sustainable mathematical draw. So that's the first thing I look for. We know after many, many years of research and the mathematical models that we use, that from a quantitative standpoint, 4 to 6% is very sustainable. So that's the first thing I look for, is a draw rate between 4 and 6% on an annual basis. All right, next up, where is the income going to come from? An income plan of some kind. You know, anytime you do a financial plan, the planner or the wealth manager who's helping you do that plan should be able to analyze different spend orders based on the types of accounts you have. Most people these days have different types of accounts. They have qualified plans, they have IRAs, they have Roth IRAs, they have taxable accounts, they have insurance values. You've got to look at each one of those kind of independently and say, okay, if I change the draw order, how long will my money last? And it's usually not the same answer. You can overspend in retirement on taxes by anywhere between 10 and 20% if you get the draw order wrong, and we do have the ability to analyze that. So anytime a financial plan is put together, you want to have a good idea of what order and where that income is coming from, including Social Security. When are you going to draw Social Security? When does that happen? What order do you start taking from this account here, that account there? It makes a big difference, and can make a big difference significantly in the amount of taxes you pay and how much is left over at the end of your plan. So that's the second thing I look for, is what is the assumed order that this person is assuming that they're going to draw from these accounts, and how does that affect their projected taxes in the future, and how much income is going to be left and assets are going to be left at the end of their plan. It can make a big difference if you get it wrong, but you want to analyze those things and have at least somebody take a look at that. So that's number two, is where's the income going to come from? When do you start Social Security? What's the break even on that? And how long will these assets last if I spend them in a given order? All right, number three, and this one tends to scare people the most, and it's healthcare. If you are retiring before the age of 65, and many people do in this country, under current law, you will not be eligible for Medicare unless you are disabled, and I certainly hope that's not the case. But if you are needing a bridge to Medicare between, let's say, the age of 60 to 65 or 61 to 65 or even younger than that, then you need to have a separate line item in your plan, and this is something we always work into our plans, a separate line item that says on an after-tax basis what it's going to cost you for health care because it is a fairly expensive item before you hit the age of Medicare. Currently, Medicare will cost you on average about $175, $180 a month for most people in what you call a normal income range. If you're higher income, it's going to cost you more, but prior to that, you need a separate line item in your financial plan that says what you're going to spend on an after-tax basis on healthcare, and it can range anywhere from, let's say, $650 to $700 on the low end per month, all the way up to $1,000 or $2,000 per month. It just depends on your needs and what kind of healthcare situation you're in, obviously, and what kind of drug coverage you need, things like that. So what I look for, number 3, is a plan of, as far as a bridge, how much is it going to cost between the ages of your retirement, let's say it's 60, from 60 to 65, how much are you going to spend per month on healthcare on an after-tax basis? And if I don't see that written into a plan, that I don't consider that to be a fully vetted plan, so to speak. So what's your bridge? Are you going to extend COBRA benefits? If you're close enough to 65 and you can extend your COBRA benefits, that might be a viable plan. You can shop the marketplace at the ACA. You can go on a spouse's coverage. Whatever your plan is, specifically what quantitatively is your plan to get that bridge from the age of retirement to the age of Medicare? So that is number 3 that I look for. What is the after-tax cost for healthcare? All right, and finally, what are your assets going to generate in retirement, otherwise known as your rate of return? So when most financial plans are built these days, they usually come in on a range from, let's say, 3.5% if you're very conservative, annual rate of return, up to maybe 6.5% on the rate of return is what I like to see. Anything north of 6.5%, I think that might be a little aggressive, especially as we age, and it's natural. You tend to incorporate more investments like cash, bonds, fixed income, annuities, more conservative things, and that's perfectly natural. So assuming a rate of return of 7, 8, 9, 10%, and I have seen financial plans that have factored that in, or at least that's implied, I would say that's a bit too aggressive. I like to look for a 3.5% rate of return on the low end, up to maybe a 6.5% return on the high end quantitatively to make that viable and truly vet that plan, make sure it's achievable. I think in the modern era, with rates where they are, that's a pretty reasonable assumption going forward, given now that we're kind of past the era of ultra low interest rates, and you can get a little bit more on your cash. So 3.5% to 6.5%, it's kind of my sweet spot. Anything above that, I think it's not really reasonable, and might need some tweaking or some readjusting of the goals to meet that. So those 4 things: number 1, your draw rate; number 2, your income plan; number 3, what's your bridge to healthcare; and number 4, what's your assumed rate of return. If you can pass all 4 of those tests within a reasonable, mathematically sustainable range, you have my blessing to retire, as long as you are ready to retire. Don't forget, there's a qualitative side to this too, and I unfortunately can't help you with that. But as far as the numbers go, we can give you right and wrong answers to these questions, and that's one thing I love about this business. Well, that's it for today. Hey, listen, if you want to learn more about us or the things that we do for our folks, you can go to www.thewell.work. That's thewell.work. For more information about us, you'll find everything there. My name again is Matthew Coyle. Thanks again for joining me. I really do appreciate your time. It is your most valuable asset, so spend it wisely. I will see you next time. Thanks again. Bye.